Hello, my name's Andy. Welcome to episode 8 of Keeping Water. In this week's episode, I'll be talking about what I would do if I could go back in time and restart from scratch, both with a budget and with a money no object approach. After that, I'll give you an update on how things have gone with my pond over the last week, which will include a near disaster, feeding worms to the rud, and the start of data collection. Before I start, however, I'm just going to take a minute to explain a little bit about the channel, as there's been some changes since I started. I now have 3 types of videos. Firstly, the main weekly episodes, the 8th of which you're watching now. They're released every Saturday at 8 AM and will mostly have one topical project with a weekly update as well. Secondly, clips. These are short videos, under a minute, which give a glimpse of content that will, usually, appear in future episodes. There will be 1 to 3 of these a week. Lastly, retro episodes. While making the first 2 videos detailing the history of the pond, I trawled through a lot of old clips. Some made the cut, some didn't, or did so heavily edited. I've also since found a few more videos. These retro episodes are not planned to show more mistakes or disasters, but instead show a little of how the pond and its inhabitants functioned before I rebuilt it as it is today. These will probably not be released to a regular schedule, just as I find time and edit them together. I think there will probably be about 4 to 5 in total. Okay, on to this week's topic. I don't know about you, but I'm awful at DIY. I'm also awful at learning new things. 5 years ago, when I started my pond, I was even worse at DIY, and as it was my first pond, I knew little to nothing about building them. I therefore made a lot of mistakes, some of which I put right when I rebuilt it, and some of which are still there. But more than just correcting mistakes, there are things I can see or think of now that would make it, well, just better, and others that would definitely make my life easier. When breaking down what I would do differently, I'm going to look at both a budgeted, real-world scenario and a what-if, lottery win version. First off, the shape and size of the pond. There's not a lot I'd change about the footprint of the pond. It dominates the garden enough as it is, and there's not too much space for anything bigger. Deeper is another issue though, and although I know why I didn't dig down more, my back wouldn't have taken it, if I could do it all again I would dig it out to about 6 foot. Starting from scratch, I would repeat the same basic shape, as a more rounded shape with less straight lines looks more natural. I would, however, place it differently in the garden. Instead of being broadly in the middle of the garden, I'd place it turned 90 degrees and more over to the left. This is partly aesthetics and partly practical, and will have benefits with other changes I would make. I think, on a budget, I would still have to use liner and underlay, although with the shape of pond I have, it's difficult to get this neat, well at least for me it is. The alternative, if I had the money, would be to build a concrete base and use blocks to build the walls of the pond, which would be made watertight by fiberglassing. The benefits to this are strength, resistance to root growth, being able to add insulation, and having a smoother and more attractive finish. Aside from adding a backy shower that I'm already planning for the next year, and having a variable speed pump, I wouldn't change anything too much about the filtration if I started again on a budget. Having more cash, however, is a different matter. In spite of not minding too much the amount of cleaning and maintenance I have to do for my current setup, having less to do would be nice. So if I could start over with lots of money, I'd definitely have a drum filter, a large moving bed and a backy shower. Not that different from my current setup, except far less maintenance and a greater biological capacity. A more significant change would be a bottom drain rather than a pump in the pond. It wouldn't be a gravity-fed system, however, as the filtration wouldn't be able to be at the same height as the surface of the pond. Which brings me nicely to where I place the filtration. The most confusing decision I made was to place the filtration the furthest side of the pond to the house, which meant I take the electrics from the conservatory under the ground for nearly the full length of the garden, and then initially, for the first version, out of the ground to an open-air switch box, or, as now, into the shed. A much more sensible choice, and one I would definitely make if I could go back in time, is to either have the filtration in the garage or a filter shed right next to the garage. I could then limit the amount of cabling I'd have to run outdoors, instead burying the pipework underground, an endeavour made much easier by placing the pond to the left of the garden. So, to recap, if I could go back in time, I'd build the pond to the side, along the left-hand fence, make it deeper but otherwise no bigger. With more cash, I'd make it fiberglass blockwork rather than liner, and I'd have a drum filter, bottom drain, and a larger biological capacity. Lastly, rich or not, I'd put the filtration either in the garage or in a shed right next to it. Ah well, maybe version 3. I'd love to hear what you would do differently if you could start again, or if you had a bigger budget. Please post your thoughts below. This last week started with a mini disaster. During a filter clean, my submersible pump died, and in doing so tripped the house electrics. Once that was sorted, I removed the broken pump from the switch box, but still nothing in the shed came on, although the house electrics were working. This happened to me before, when another pump died on me. Anyway, I disconnected everything in turn from the switch box and tested after each one. Nothing worked until I removed everything apart from the main pump. I then reconnected everything one by one and it all worked again. I've no idea why this happens with my switch box like this, but it was the same when the other pump failed. Disconnect everything, then reconnect, and it all works. If anyone can explain why, I'd be really grateful. A stressful hour aside, no real problems resulted from this, but I did need to replace the pump, as it's a vital part of filter maintenance. I was loath to buy another version of the one I had, as it was temperamental before it died. Instead, I got a TAC Life submersible water 400 watt pump, which was the same price, smaller so handy for use in the filter, lighter, quieter, has the same flow rate and has a consistently working float switch, so a bit of a win really. I'm now plugging it into the garage rather than to the filter switch box, so if there's further problems it won't affect that. As I mentioned last week, the rudd love earthworms, so I spent half an hour digging for some in one of my wife's post-harvest raised beds. I didn't find too many, but the rudd enjoyed them. As you'll see, they happily take and fight over worms as long as they are. Interestingly, neither the tench or carp are remotely interested in them. I really want to supplement the rudd's diet more over the next year, and because my garden isn't exactly overflowing with them, I've long planned to build a wormery. Watch this space into the new year. As I mentioned in episode 7, I have a new thermometer and I'm keen to keep a more objective eye on the pond. So obviously, as a bit of a geek, I've made a spreadsheet for recording the data. It's only got temperatures recorded so far, as I need to buy more test kits for other parameters. I've not got the cash for everything at once, so I'll be getting one type each month, starting with ammonia at the end of September. As time goes by and I get more data and more tests, I'll improve the dashboard and how I display the results, which should help me have a better idea of how the pond's doing, and hopefully spot problems before they get too serious. I think it's pretty important, as all good pond keepers will tell you, and anyway, my channel's called Keeping Water, so I really should do better. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Keeping Water. Please like and subscribe if you've enjoyed this, take a look at some of the other videos I've got on the channel, and share if you'd like. In next week's video I'm going to be taking a look at the pond keeping YouTube channels that I watch the most, and explaining what I find particularly enjoyable about each of them. There'll also be another weekly update. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.